Gentlemen, I think after a long day's work, I shall retire. Good night, Your Majesty. We bid thee a good night, Your Majesty. Good and great friend, I have the honor to submit for Your Majesty's consideration some reflections respecting the independent state of Congo, based upon a careful study and inspection of the country and character of the personal government you have established upon the African continent. It afforded me great pleasure to avail myself of the opportunity afforded to me last year of visiting your state in Africa, and how thoroughly I have been disenchanted, disappointed, and disheartened. It is now my painful duty to make known to Your Majesty in plain and respectful language every charge which I am about to bring against Your Majesty's personal government in the Congo has been carefully investigated. A list of competent and veracious witnesses, documents, letters, official records, and data has been faithfully prepared, which will be deposited with Her Britannic Majesty's Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, until such time as an international commission can be created with power to send for persons and papers to administer oaths and attest the truth or falsity of those charges. George Washington Williams. If greed were a person, what do you imagine they'd look like? Are they a man or a woman, tall, short? Do they have a punchable face? What does this person do for a living? Are they a criminal, a bank, insurance, or pharmaceutical executive? Are they overweight and dressed like the Monopoly Man, where dollar bills flutter like leaves from their ass crack? Or are they an unscrupulous mechanic or shopkeeper trying to nickel and dime you for every little thing? What if I told you that history has a pretty close approximation? That person would be Belgium's second monarch, King Leopold II. In this episode, we will explore the incredibly dark history of the Congo region in Central Africa. Congo is one of the most lush, geographically diverse, and materially rich nations on Earth. But like many countries blessed with an abundance of natural resources, Congo has been doomed to exploitation by European colonizers and extractive industries. The worst of these predators was King Leopold, whose need to secure a colony for the young nation of Belgium drove the king to deceive the international community for decades. His deception was a cover for his quest to create wealth for his own fortune and for Belgium at the cost of an estimated millions of lives. Leopold's personal property, the Congo Free State, utilized the barbaric services of the Force Publique, a secret police force that terrorized the Congolese people. This episode is structured a little differently. We'll still follow the usual flow, but one, we'll be exploring two places, the Democratic Republic of Congo and Belgium, with emphasis on Congo since that's where the Force Publique was active. And two, I will argue at the end that the Force Publique should be considered a secret police. When researching the Force Publique, they are often referred to as a mercenary group or the Army of the Congo Free State or something else. I argue that the Force Publique should be considered a secret police force because of their mission and the unique structure of the Congo Free State. I do not argue or believe that definitions of the Force Publique are mutually exclusive. And by that, I mean the Force Publique fits the definition of secret police, a mercenary group, or whatever other type of coercive institution simultaneously. Hopefully, by the end of this episode, you will see why I think that characterization is appropriate. Before we get started, just a quick note that Samsung Podcasts closed on December 1st of 2024. So if you were subscribed on that platform, you can still find Secret Police on basically every other platform such as Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever. You can contact me by following Secret Police on Instagram at Secret Police Podcast, or you can email me at secretpolicepodcast@gmail.com. I love to hear from the audience, so please send me your messages and let me know how you are liking the show and what could be better. So we are tackling several key questions. What is the history of the Democratic Republic of Congo? Why is the country shaped the way it is, where it's narrow in the west and wide in the east? What was the Berlin Conference? Who was King Leopold II of Belgium and what is his legacy today? What was the Force Publique? Why did they exist in the first place? And why do I believe they count as a secret police force? All this and more right now. You are listening to the Secret Police Podcast. Do you have a problem with authority? Because I do. My name is Jack, and I am on a mission to help us all build a healthy skepticism towards those in power. And I spend hours engaging with my morbid fascination with dictatorships and share with you the history and methods of the world's most brutal secret police forces. Where is Congo and what is it like? Located in the middle of the African continent are the modern Republic of Congo and then the Democratic Republic of Congo, or DRC. Our story takes place more or less within the geographic bounds of the DRC. The country is centered in the Congo River Basin, and a basin is a depression in the Earth's surface. The Congo River Basin is the second largest river basin in the world at 1.3 million square miles or 3.4 million square kilometers. The first largest being the Amazon. Also second largest to the Amazon is the Congo rainforest, a deep jungle inhabited by some of the Earth's rarest creatures like the lowland gorilla, parrots, and the okapi that sort of resembles a zebra. Some parts of the jungle have never heard the buzz of a saw. The forest receives, on average, 120 centimeters or nearly 50 inches of rain per year, and the Congo sky can be a theater of lightning unlike any other on Earth. The DRC has several other regions in addition to the lush river basin, which is mostly concentrated in the north. The Kivu region in eastern Congo has Mount Nyiragongo and Mount Nyamuragira, which together contribute roughly 40% of Africa's total volcanic activity. Mount Nyiragongo has the world's largest lava lake centered in a crater estimated to be roughly 200 meters deep and 1.2 kilometers across, which doesn't sound big until I tell you that an American football field is 100 yards, or about 0.1 kilometers long. So this crater is roughly 12 football fields in diameter. That sounds pretty sweet, and I definitely want to visit there one day. Moving south from the volcanic region are the Katanga and Kasai regions, which are a little drier than the river basin, but still very green. These regions contain most of the country's mining operations for precious metals, diamonds, and other useful yet toxic metals like cobalt. In fact, because of the river basin, minerals and other sediments have been deposited over God knows how many millions of years. Add the rainforest, and the DRC is smack dab in a sweet spot for maximum natural and mineral resources. It's estimated that Congo is sitting on something like $25 trillion of mineral wealth. In an absurd and totally unrealistic scenario, Congo alone could theoretically pay nearly 70% of the total US national debt. To the west of the Kasai is the western region, which is another lush area with subsistence agriculture and commercial fishing supplied by the mighty Congo River, which winds through the country in a U shape for just over 2,900 miles or more than 4,700 kilometers, over 400 miles longer than the distance a plane travels from New York to Los Angeles. Fish is the main source of protein for the human inhabitants of the western region. One popular dish called makobe is fish seasoned with spices, wrapped in a banana leaf, and roasted. Zooming out a bit, the DRC is surrounded by 9 neighbors. I will name Congo's neighbors going clockwise, starting in the north: the Central African Republic, South Sudan, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, Zambia, Angola, and the Republic of Congo. The Democratic Republic of Congo is the second largest country in Africa, second to Algeria. The U.S. state of Texas is about 1/3 the size of the DRC, and the DRC is roughly 4 times the size of France. French is the official language of the DRC. We'll find out why later. But the DRC, with a population of about 100 million people, has more French speakers than France's 68 million. There are, however, 4 other official languages spoken in the DRC: Lingala, Swahili, Shiluba, and Kikongo. Random fact about Lingala: legendary guitarist Carlos Santana, in his album titled Supernatural, has a song called Dale Yaleo, which is both in Spanish and Lingala if you want to hear what the language sounds like. In the DRC, Lingala is spoken mostly in the capital city and along the Congo River. Swahili is spoken mostly along the DRC's eastern border. Kikongo is spoken in the west, and Shiluba is spoken in the center. Roughly 80% of the Congolese people have Bantu ancestry, while 18% are non-Bantu, and the remaining people come from other ethnic groups, tribes, or from Europe. The DRC's capital city is Kinshasa, which is across the river from the Republic of Congo's capital, Brazzaville. They are the world's closest neighboring capital cities. Does that get confusing for them? It did, but the locals have solved this problem by distinguishing themselves as being from either Congo Kinshasa or Congo Brazza. The DRC is not a landlocked state. A few points on the DRC's shape now, and we'll find out later why this shape exists. In general, the DRC is wide on the north-south axis, starting in the east and funnels into a narrow corridor moving west. The corridor is called the Bas-Congo province and gives the DRC a mere 32-kilometer wide coastline access to the South Atlantic Ocean. That's about 19 miles of coastline. That's only 6 miles more than the length of my hometown, Vashon Island, Washington. Yeah, 19 miles would be a lot to walk, but that's a tiny strip for a country 3 times the size of Texas. But sea-axis is sea-axis, and if you thought that there would be a port city there, because that makes perfect sense, well, we are mistaken. Instead, ships have to travel an additional 50 miles or 75 kilometers up the Congo River to the port city of Boma, or an additional 20 miles or 40 kilometers on top of that to the larger port city of Matadi. Why? Well, both Boma and more so Matadi are connected by road and rail. So both cities are the links to the DRC's international trade. However, less than 3% of the DRC's roads are paved, and rails are difficult to install because while the river basin soil is so rich and great for agriculture, it is not good for providing stability for rails or the trains that travel along them. River ferrying is the dominant transportation method in the DRC since most of the country is accessible by river. Overall, today, the DRC is underdeveloped economically speaking. Most of the population doesn't have access to electricity or running water. Many people live in small villages scattered across the country. There are so many of these villages, and they're pretty easy to find on Google Maps. I mean, seriously, go on Google Maps, satellite view, and look at the DRC and zoom in enough to find small patches of exposed ground like scars in the forest. And if you zoom in further, you'll see homes. Try it. It took me less than 20 seconds to find a tiny village. Despite the abundance of resources and fertile land, the DRC isn't exactly known for being politically stable. To understand some of the reasons for why this is the case, we have to travel back in time. We briefly visited the Congo region back when we discussed the transatlantic slave trade in the episode on Haiti's Tonton Macoute. We talked about how European merchants sailed along the African west coast from Sierra Leone, Ghana, Togo, Cameroon, Gabon, Congo, and Angola. Some of these African coastal regions developed societies, monarchies, and caste systems. Europeans imported guns, metals, and other goods to these societies in exchange for slaves. For example, in the late 17th century, disagreement over the rightful successor to the Congolese throne ignited a civil war. By the time the war ended, many of those on the losing side were sold as slaves to Europeans bound for the New World. Sources estimate that the Congo River Basin was inhabited roughly 90,000 years ago by various tribes during the Paleolithic era. Over thousands of years, Bantu-speaking peoples expanded in the region. Some of these societies developed into kingdoms. Towards the end of the 14th century, a collective of Bantu-speaking peoples founded the Kingdom of Congo. According to the Africa Museum in Brussels, Oral traditions indicate that the Congo Kingdom was founded by Nimi Aninzima of Mbemba Kasi and Nsaku Lau of Mbata around the year 1392. They agreed that the descendants of Nimi Nzima would inherit the throne and rule from the city of Mbanza Congo in present-day Angola. Each subsequent Congolese king carried the title Mani Congo. The Congo Kingdom itself occupied parts of modern-day Angola, Gabon, and both Congos along the coast of the Atlantic as it conquered, expanded, and integrated smaller territories. The capital was a densely populated area, much more so than other parts of the kingdom. This geographic distribution strengthened the king's position over his subjects. That is, the concentration of people and economic activity allowed for a strong central government. Newly conquered peoples outside of the kingdom could be enslaved and integrated into the city's population, and the monarchy levied immense taxes on its people. Sources indicate that taxes could be paid in terms of commodities that weren't produced in the capital. However, the kingdom had a medium of exchange or currencies such as certain varieties of snail shells. One source said that the Congo monarchy taxed the ever-loving frack out of its people, which incentivized people to move out of the capital and into other parts of the kingdom. The fewer people in the capital, the less power the king had. However, the king threatened the rural population with slavery or demanded loyalty in exchange for protection from outsiders and hostile tribes. Now, the concept of slavery in Africa before the arrival of Europeans can be controversial to say the least. Just the mention of slavery is enough to make some people want to invade the South. Slavery did exist in Africa before the arrival of Europeans. In the case of the Congolese, if you were a rural subsistence farmer and did not pay your taxes to the king could still make a few coins by selling your ass to Arab merchants linked to the Indian Ocean slave trade, just so the Congo king could fill the gaps in the ledger. This continued until the 80s, man. Hairspray, Walkmans, and laissez-faire capitalism. Except not really, because it was the 1480s. Specifically 1483, when Portuguese explorers sailed along Africa's west coast and eventually stumbled upon the Congo region. Well, technically, the Portuguese explorer Diogo Cão found the mouth of the Congo River, so he and his crew placed a stone claiming the region for Portugal. They navigated up the river a ways until they encountered inhabitants of the Congo Kingdom willing to engage in trade. One very influential thing the Portuguese traded to the Congolese was Catholicism. Christian missionaries worked to spread the gospel to the Congolese people over the years and were successful. So successful, in fact, that the Mani Congo converted to Catholicism. The Congolese ruler at the time, King Nziga A Nkuwu, converted and took the name João I. His son became Afonso I, who was baptized and helped spread Christianity within the kingdom. One of Afonso's sons, Diogo I, was born as the third generation of African Christian kings and knew little if nothing of past spiritual beliefs. One of Diogo I's brothers, Enrique Kinu Mvemba, became Central Africa's first bishop. By the way, the name João is the equivalent of John in English, yeah? Falo pouco de português. In practice, Catholicism was not spread to the Congolese people, but rather held within a close circle of the elite and wealthy. The original sin that began to fragment the relationship between the Congo Kingdom and the European trade partners was the Portuguese insistence that the Congo Kingdom continued to trade in human beings. During the leadership of Diogo I, starting in the mid-1500s, the Congo Kingdom raided neighboring civilizations to capture human beings. These campaigns created a lot of tension in the region and, in some cases, all-out war. The Congo Kingdom's system of government morphed into a replica of Portugal's and shed many of its previous culture's traditions. However, there was a faction of Congolese people who were staunchly anti-Portugal. The selling of slaves to the Portuguese intensified anti-European sentiments, but for all intents and purposes, Diogo I sort of backed himself into a Congo corner. See, one of the goods the Congo government received in exchange for slaves were weapons. Weapons kept the king in power and helped procure more slaves. Sell slaves, get guns, people get angry, so you need more guns, so you need to sell more slaves, and repeat. If the Portuguese felt like the king wasn't performing the slave trade up to their standards, They could just as well sell guns to a neighboring power, and King Diogo would be cooked faster than you can say lava lake. Diogo planned a rebellion against the Portuguese to try and break the cycle and preserve his rule and himself. However, he died and was succeeded by Afonso II in 1561, who was then murdered by Bernardo I later that same year. The years between the mid-16th century and the mid-19th century were contentious, with Congo's changing identity, conflict with Portugal and African neighbors, a civil war which fractured the kingdom, and of course, the growing slave trade. We'll jump ahead a couple of centuries to 1858, to the start of the rule of King Pedro IV. The Portuguese continued to have influence in Congo and essentially took the country over as a colony. As you might be aware, this relationship between Africa and Europe was not isolated to Congo. Elsewhere on the continent, European powers were carving out pieces of Africa for themselves. From Europe's various perspectives, Africa contained the necessary material resources and territory to sustain industrial economies and expand their respective empires. The land grab was sort of a free-for-all among European empires until German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck called a conference to formalize and agree upon designated land for each empire. We'll return to that conference later because first we must travel north to the European continent and familiarize ourselves with Belgium. Belgium is part of Europe's Low Countries, nestled between the Netherlands in the north, Germany in the east, Luxembourg in the south, and France to the west. Belgium's location makes it vulnerable to the influence and bad behavior of its neighbors. They have 3 official languages, French, German, and Dutch. Belgium is also split into 3 ethnic groups, or rather communities, the Flemish in the north, the French in the south, and the small German community in the east. There are also 3 economic regions, again with the Flemish region in the north, the Walloon region in the south, and the Brussels capital region located inside the Flemish region. It's kind of a miracle Belgium exists at all, considering these distinctive territories that could have been split amongst France, Germany, and the Netherlands. But that obviously didn't happen. The Roman Empire controlled the lowland region starting around 57 BC to the 5th century in an area called Gallia Belgica. The Belgi tribes fascinated the Emperor Julius Caesar, who viewed their culture as noticeably different from the Celtic and Germanic tribes that existed more or less in the same space. The Belgi people staged several failed uprisings against their Roman overlords, and the Romans wouldn't retreat until about 486 CE, when the area was ruled by the Franks and then later the Holy Roman Empire. The lowland countries were split into several states like Flanders and the Duchy of Limburg. In 1556, Spain took control of the lowlands and embarked on a campaign to expel Protestants from the region. Then King of Spain, Philip II, imposed tyrannical rule and was determined to solidify the power of the Catholic Church. The Spanish Netherlands, as it was called, remained part of Habsburg Spain. This is an oversimplification because there were royal connections between Spain and the Holy Roman Empire. The whole situation was much more complicated. Starting in the 18th century, Spanish rule of the lowlands was relinquished and control of the region passed between the French, British, Holy Roman Empire, and the Austrian Habsburgs, like some great power, King of the Hill. Well, in this case, it's King of the below sea level. Following the Napoleonic Wars, Europe joined together during the Conference of Vienna in 1814 to 1815 to create a long-term peace agreement. One result of this conference was the creation of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, which included the modern territory of Belgium. And their king would be William I. However, he was a Protestant king in a Catholic nation. Additionally, the working class were discontent with increasing unemployment and the king's tyrannical tendencies. Tensions reached their peak when the southern region, that is what became Belgium, broke away and riots spread across the territory from Brussels. King William sent troops to quell the uprising, but the Belgians stood firm against the Dutch forces and demanded independence. About a month later, King William withdrew his troops. Belgium had its territorial integrity, but not international recognition. In fact, Belgium's actions called into question the legitimacy of the agreements made during the Conference of Vienna. The Conference of London was held in 1830 between France, Belgium, Austria, Prussia, and Russia, who agreed to recognize Belgium as an independent kingdom on December the 20th of 1830. But as I said, Belgium today has distinct regional cultures and languages due to its location. During the conference, the French proposed that Belgium be split along these cultural axes, and the pieces absorbed into France, the Netherlands, and Prussia, which in a way makes intuitive sense. But no, the Belgians wanted to do their own thing. There was, however, one country not happy about this. The Netherlands was... I'm not sure. They were pissed and launched an invasion of Belgium in 1831. Spoiler alert, the Dutch were unsuccessful, and Belgium established their constitution on February 7th of 1831 and declared that the new nation would be a constitutional monarchy. But who would be the king? The Belgians weren't going to select a monarch from one of the Dutch royal houses. The Belgians also considered royal candidates from France, but decided against this for fear that a French king would annex the new country. On April 22nd, 1831, Leopold, a German-born member of the Saxe-Coburg House, was offered the Belgian throne. He was also the uncle of Queen Victoria of Great Britain. On July 22nd, 1831, Leopold was formally inaugurated as the first king of Belgium. As a monarch, Leopold I strengthened the Belgian army with the help of England and France as a check against the Dutch. William refused to recognize Belgium as a sovereign state until 1839. Leopold expanded the education system and granted greater autonomy to both urban and rural regions. He strengthened commercial ties with France and Prussia and kept Belgium out of foreign conflicts like the Crimean War in 1853. His throne was also largely spared any heat from the wave of revolution sweeping Europe in 1848. In his personal life, Leopold I married Charlotte of Wales in May of 1816. Charlotte tragically gave birth to a stillborn baby and died soon after due to postpartum complications in November of 1817. Leopold wouldn't remarry until 1832 to Marie Louise of Orleans, the daughter of King Louis Philippe of France. In April 1835, Leopold I and Marie Louise would welcome their son and Leopold I's eventual successor, Leopold II. Leopold Louis Philippe Marie Victor was born on April 9th, 1835, to his royal parents Leopold I and Marie Louise. Young Leo was the first of 3 living siblings, Prince Philippe and Princess Charlotte. They had an older sister who died in infancy before little Leo was born. They also had at least 2 half-siblings, George born in 1849 and Alfred born in 1852, due to Leopold I having an affair with a girl named Arcadie Claret. And when I say girl, I mean girl, because she was a teenager and Leopold I was in his early 50s. Queen Marie Louise was unhappy with her marriage, but quite deplorably took out her bitterness on her kids. By today's standards, she was verbally abusive. Check this out. Apparently, she made fun of the size of Leopold's nose, saying that he had, quote, the beak of a bird. Really taking home the Mom of the Year award, weren't you, Marie? The source says Leo's nose was more from his father, but just by looking at paintings of Marie Louise, I think Leo had her nose. Despite young Leo being heir to the throne, it was obvious to him that his parents favored his siblings, Philippe and Charlotte. In 1840, when Leo was 5 years old, he was granted the title Duke of Brabant. Yeah, well, I mean, when I was 5, they called me a kindergartner, so whatever. At home, Leopold spoke French, his mother's native language, but he also learned German and English in line with the educational tradition of royalty. Leopold studied under Count Gustave de Lannoy, who kept Leopold on a pretty tight schedule of 8 hours of studying per day. Leopold was apparently not the best student, while his siblings excelled in their studies. For this, his mom also called him bird brain. Or, that didn't happen. He did, however, enjoy drawing, geography, and politics. While Leopold didn't really care too much about his education, he did find Belgium's political affairs fascinating. Big Daddy Leopold wanted Baby Boy to focus more on his studies and instructed Count Lannoy to be more strict, but the effort was in vain. In 1848, King Leopold I's father-in-law, King Louis Philippe I of France, was overthrown by Louis Napoleon III, nephew of the Napoleon Bonaparte. King Leopold's relation to the overthrown ex-king damaged his reputation. Leopold I figured relations with France could be improved via a royal marriage, specifically of young Leopold. In October 1850, when Leo was 15, Marie-Louise died from tuberculosis. Despite her treatment of her eldest son, Leopold was deeply affected by his mother's death, and Daddy Leopold did not possess the emotional availability to comfort his children. Sources indicate that King Leopold typically corresponded with teenage Leopold via secretaries. Man, how royals parented their kids back in the day is something I will never wrap my head around. In August 1853, then 18-year-old Leopold married the Archduchess Marie Henriette, who was a cousin of Franz Joseph I of Austria, which connected the Belgian monarchy to the House of Habsburg. Leopold and Marie Henriette were not meant for each other whatsoever. Leopold was pretty reserved and quiet, whereas Marie Henriette was much more outgoing and rode horses. Now, it is not uncommon for an extrovert and an introvert to function as a couple. However, Leo and Marie were apparently painfully awkward around each other. Supposedly, their staff suggested that watching Leopold and Henriette together was like watching, quote, a nun and a stable boy. Now, I don't even really understand what that means. So let's just say Leopold and Henriette were like pandas trying to figure out how to do it. People found this nun and stable boy comment so accurate that it got passed around by most of their acquaintances. It's a good thing Leo's mom wasn't alive to roast him about this. His parents never bothered to give Leo the talk, or maybe one of King Daddy's secretaries tried to explain it. But when it came to the bedroom, Leo couldn't calculate the angle and depth necessary for conception. Never mind solve for X, bro couldn't even solve for sex. I mentioned that Queen Victoria was the niece of King Leopold I. I believe that would make Leopold II the first cousin of Queen Victoria. The source said she was his aunt, but I don't think that's technically correct. Whatever the case, Queen Victoria supposedly gave young Leopold a lot of sex advice. I bet that was pretty awkward. Apparently, Leo and Marie Henriette visited Queen Victoria, and she was so impressed with Marie's intelligence and artistic sense, but was disappointed by Leo, who she viewed as uninteresting. Funny side note about Queen Victoria, the famous lingerie store Victoria's Secret is a reference to the late Queen. According to a Time magazine article from December 2015, the founder of Victoria's Secret, Roy Raymond, was inspired to design the stores in Victorian era style. The article says, quote, "The look was meant to impact a sense of class and dignity associated with the Victorian era and the queen for which it's named," end quote. So after having many awkward conversations with his cousin and probably not buying his wife lingerie, Leo and Marie Henriette managed to have several children: Princess Louise, born in 1858, Prince Leopold in 1859, Princess Stephanie in 1864, and Princess Clementine in 1872. In addition to their trip to England, Leo and Marie traveled to various parts of the world during their early years of marriage, such as Germany, Austria, and Italy. While en route to Egypt, they arrived at the beautiful coastal city of Alexandria in February 1855 and were welcomed by the Viceroy of Egypt, Mohammed Said Pasha, whose position was like a sub-ruler of the region since Egypt was part of the Ottoman Empire at the time. During his stay, Leopold developed the idea to create a steamship company to connect Alexandria to the Belgian port of Antwerp. The other idea bouncing around his brain was that Belgium should establish a colony in Africa, specifically in or near Egypt. Next, Leo and Marie traveled to Jerusalem, where they were the guests of the Ottoman ruler, Sultan Abdulmejid I. After an Easter weekend with the Sultan, they traveled to Syria, Lebanon, then met King Otto and Queen Amelia of Greece in Athens. After Greece, they went back to Italy to meet with royalty in Naples, and then the Pope. Finally, Leo and Marie returned to Belgium in August 1855, where it was back to serious business. Leo made a diplomatic visit to France, and his presence sapped the enthusiasm from the royal court. Leopold was the kind of guy where whenever he walked into a room, everything went from color to black and white. But his position as a duke meant one of his major responsibilities were these sorts of diplomatic visits. Now we have to make a quick detour to visit Daddy Leopold I because we need to know why the Belgian monarchy was so interested in obtaining an overseas colony. When the Belgian state broke away from the Netherlands, they lost access to Dutch colonies in the Caribbean and Southeast Asia. Independence came at the cost of no previously established colonial empire to fuel economic growth, unlike her neighbors. Belgium was thrown into the mess of 19th century Europe at a huge disadvantage. It would be like if you started a new job with little to no education or experience in the field while your colleagues already have years of training and experience. The Belgian monarchy realized they needed to play catch-up. But how? Leopold I recognized the problem for his newly formed nation and set about surveying different places around the world for a potential Belgian colony. Some of those places include the Greek island of Crete, Cuba, the Caribbean islands, Latin America, Africa, and get this, parts of Texas, since Texas gained independence from Mexico in March of 1836 and didn't join the United States until December 1845. There was an attempt to establish a Belgian colony in Guatemala, but they had to abandon the attempt after many of the first Belgian explorers died of tropical diseases. In 1859, the British and French deployed troops in a joint effort against China in the pursuit of opening the opium trade and gaining access to Chinese ports. Leopold I thought that if he committed Belgian troops to the campaign, that there could be an opportunity to secure a colony for Belgium. The plan was that roughly 1,500 Belgian troops would be contributed to the Second Opium War, but the Belgian parliament refused to finance the deployment. In response, Sonny Boy Leo co-authored a roughly 200-page argument for a Belgian colony, along with Auguste Lembermont from the Foreign Affairs Ministry and a military engineer named Captain Henry Alexis Brialmont. Leo was very enthusiastic about securing a colony for Belgium and often corresponded with his father about this matter. By the 1860s, Leopold I was having health issues, and his work to find a suitable space to colonize diminished. Young Leo took over the task of finding a colony. Leo enlisted the help of Captain Brialmont to research and select potential colonies. In 1864, Leo traveled to Constantinople, Spain, India, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and Hong Kong to research how the most successful colonizers operated. By the time Leo returned to Belgium in May 1865, Leopold I was not doing so hot and died that December the 10th, shortly before his 75th birthday. The Duke of Brabant, Leopold, then became King Leopold II of Belgium. At first, Leopold's ministers were uncertain about how he would rule, given that he was so damn boring, but he did have a sharp political sense. There were also anxieties that the French would invade Belgium, baguettes ablazing, as a check on the growing power of Otto von Bismarck and the Prussians. With France and Prussia about to square up, Leopold was concerned that neither side would respect Belgium's sovereignty. He sought assurance from the British government that they'd have his back before the French and the Prussians collectively slathered Belgium in butter and garlic and washed it down with a liter of beer. France and Prussia signed an agreement to affirm Belgian neutrality, but Leopold didn't buy it. Smart. And he mobilized the Belgian army to defend his country if necessary. Now, the fighting of the Franco-Prussian War, starting in 1870, was a little too close for comfort to the Belgian border, like the Battle of Sedan, a French town only 7 miles or 11 kilometers from the Belgian border. Following Prussia's victory in 1871, the Belgian government figured the best possible course for maintaining sovereignty would be neutrality, but Leopold disagreed in favor of keeping a large standing army. Let's return to Leopold's personal life for just a moment. I mentioned that he had a son, Prince Leopold, born in 1859, who succeeded his father as the Duke of Brabant. Unfortunately, Leopold was often ill as a child, and tragically he died at the age of 9 of pneumonia. Leopold and Marie Henriette were growing pretty distant in their marriage before their son's death, but they sort of reconciled after the boy's passing. After Princess Clementine was born in 1872, Leopold and Marie grew distant again and were only seen together on certain occasions like official ceremonies. Leopold, however, remained fixated on increasing Belgium's standing among the great powers and to secure a suitable colony. Honestly, had Leopold II just protected Belgian sovereignty, he could have been viewed as a pretty good king. A weirdo for sure, but attentive to his country. It's the colonial stuff that will make Leopold II one of the most underappreciated monsters in history. Leopold II approached the Portuguese about acquiring their holdings in Angola or Mozambique, the Spanish about the Philippines, the British about South Africa, and the French about Vietnam. You know, if having a colony was so valuable, I wonder why he thought the others would sell. One way Leopold could strengthen Belgian's standing abroad was by having his daughters married off to various princes across Europe. One of these marriages ended in disaster when Princess Stephanie married Prince Rudolf of Austria in May 1881. Rudolf, even before his marriage to Stephanie, was known for being promiscuous. At first their marriage was fine and dandy, but after the birth of their only child, Archduchess Elizabeth, Rudolf became depressed. He turned to alcohol and the comfort of other women as a distraction. Rudolf, the red-rocketed royal, contracted an STI, which he then gave to Stephanie. It's unclear which STI exactly, the source says gonorrhea, but some infections can render both women and men infertile or sterile. Stephanie was unable to conceive more children due to the infection. Rudolf and one of his many mistresses, Baroness Mary Vetsera, committed suicide together in January 1889. Now back to Leopold. While scouring the globe for colonial real estate, Leopold's attention turned to the African continent. Why? Well, Leopold was familiar with the stories from British and French explorers in Central and West Africa. In 1873, an expedition was dispatched by the British Royal Geographical Society, led by Vernet Lovett Cameron, to find rivers feeding into the Nile. The expedition hit a setback when Arab slave traders forced them to change directions, and they had no choice but to head for Angola instead of Egypt. In case it's been a minute since you've looked at a map, Angola is over 2,000 miles or over 4,000 kilometers south of Egypt. Cameron claimed the land he explored for Great Britain, but when he returned to England, the government was not interested. Leopold traveled to England in May of 1876 and met with Cameron personally. He was captivated by what Cameron told him about the abundance of various resources in the region, but that it was all being gatekept by those pesky Arab slave traders. Leopold smelled an opportunity. Perhaps the Belgians could intervene to curtail the Arab slave trade and establish a colony through a supposedly humanitarian angle. Convenient pretext wouldn't be enough, though. During his time in England, Leopold made his case for intervention to missionaries and the Royal Geographic Society, laying the groundwork for a geographical conference in Brussels. In September 1876, Leopold welcomed his guests for the conference and set the agenda to discuss the problem of slave traders along the west and east coast of Africa. By the end of the conference, Leopold founded and chaired the International Africa Association, which was an organization of explorers, philanthropists, there we go, and geographers. Headquartered in Brussels, it was intended to have branches in each country with committed members and financed by that country's government. Leopold financed the original IAA from his personal fortune. He financed an expedition from the African East Coast to Lake Tanganyika in 1877 and permitted Belgian officers to start constructing fortified structures on that lake's shores in Tanzania, just barely inserting Belgium's tip in whatever could be a colony. Here's another thing about the International Association. The British dragged their feet because the British Foreign Office had an inkling that Bird Boy was up to something. Leopold, meanwhile, needed experienced explorers to trek headfirst into Central Africa. In came Henry Morton Stanley. Born in January 1841 in Wales, Stanley emigrated to the United States at 18 years old in 1859. He joined the Confederate Army the following year with much apprehension. He was captured by the Union and ended up switching sides and was later discharged due to illness. After the war, he became a journalist and followed the American expansion out west. Later, he participated in an exploration of the Ottoman Empire, then Ethiopia, and was also tasked to find fellow explorer David Livingstone, who was lost in the African interior. Freaking Livingston forgot to purchase international data, so he was wandering around the savannas like an idiot. In the 1870s, Stanley was determined to discover other outflows into the Nile and further explore the lakes in Central Africa. Stanley and his team eventually stumbled upon what's now Livingston Falls near Kinshasa, and told of his exploration in a book called Through the Dark Continent, published in 1878. Actually, Kinshasa wasn't there yet. The short version is Stanley encountered a French explorer on one side of the Congo River who named his trading post Brazzaville, now the capital of the Republic of Congo. Stanley was like, psh, fine, I'll make my own trading post.
With blackjack and hookers.
Stanley rowed his boat to the other side of the river and named his trading post Leopoldville, which then later became Kinshasa. Stanley could not persuade the British government to take interest in the Congo region further, but there was a certain king willing to stick his beak in other people's business. Now, Leopold had already intercepted Stanley in Paris with an offer, but Stanley declined because he'd planned to essentially offer the Congo to the British. But like I just said, they didn't care. Stanley then approached the Belgian monarchy with interest to work for Leopold. In November 1878, Leopold formed the Committee for the Study of the Upper Congo, which would facilitate both commercial and philanthropic enterprises in Congo. Stanley's first mission through the committee was to construct several outposts near the mouth of the Congo River, which would serve as bases and depots for further exploration into the Upper Congo, the lush jungles, fertile lands, and awesome volcanic activity. When Stanley arrived in Africa at the start of his mission in February 1879, the company backing the expedition filed for bankruptcy. Later that year, Leopold backed the expedition from his personal fortune and founded a new philanthropic organization called the International Association of the Congo to succeed the previous Africa Association. But that summer, Stanley received some pretty sus instructions and a huge red flag to Leopold's agenda. He was ordered to obtain territory ahead of the creation of a new state. So I mentioned there was a French explorer just on the other side of the Congo River from Leopoldville. The French explorer was named Pierre Savorgnan de Brazza, hence Brazzaville. October 1882 was when things started getting contentious between European powers over territory in Africa. Brazza claimed territory for France and Congo. Word got out to Leopold, who'd already lost a son and a wife. He'd be damned if they took his precious Congo too. So he demanded that the aging Stanley return to Congo. Then the Portuguese entered the chat to reassert their centuries-long claim to the region with British support to deny the French. Leopold instructed that Stanley make African chiefs in the Congo region sign treaties that essentially transferred their land to the Congo Association. Now, the chiefs probably thought they were signing alliances, and I'm honestly not sure what translation services accompanied Stanley. But it almost wouldn't have mattered because the intention was to trick the chiefs into signing away their territory. Leopold also traveled to the United States and said, yo, you guys got my back or what? We were like, bro, what are you even doing in the Congo? Leopold was like, God's work for science. And we were like, okay, you seem like an upstanding guy. Here's an American flag. Germany entered the chat too, specifically Otto von Bismarck, who also opposed Portugal and Britain's collab in the Congo region. Bismarck asked Leopold to draw out his exact claims in Africa. Here's a map. Now show me exactly what you're claiming for Belgium here. Okay, so we went here, north following the river, part of Sudan, this little knob here, and that's it. Take a look. Your Majesty, all due respect, this is a dick. No. Give me that and stand back a little. You see it now? It's a self-portrait. And if you're familiar with the shit that happened during Stanley's exploration and you're wondering why I didn't mention it at all, I'm saving all the dark stuff for later. Leopold did cede some of his territorial ambitions in East Africa, and clearly there were some disputes needing to be resolved. However, the real victims in all of this were the people already living in Africa who had no part in Europe's process to settle these disputes. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, there were massive efforts on part of European powers to explore, claim, and dominate the African continent, with many of the natives brutalized in the process. The scramble for Africa was one term coined to describe this period. Who or what media outlet first invented this term is unclear to me, but it seems to have been a British expression. Otto von Bismarck saw that this situation could lead to a potential conflict involving European powers and potentially war. So, to his credit, my understanding is that Bismarck tried to avoid a bloody conflict by settling the disputes diplomatically. From November 1884 to February 1885, several European nations and the United States met in Berlin and negotiated claims over the African territories. Oh, and representatives from African nations as well. Yeah, no, that never happened. Europe divided up Africa like a cake. Bismarck himself chaired the conference. In attendance were representatives from Great Britain, France, Belgium, Germany, Italy, Russia, the United States, Portugal, Spain, unified Sweden, Norway, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, the Netherlands, and Turkey. This list of invitees represents powers with overseas holdings or claims, and some of these might sound strange to you. For starters, Otto von Bismarck was sort of in the same situation as Belgium in that Germany had recently unified from a loose collection of states in 1871. He was not interested in colonizing Africa, at least until both the elite and the German people demanded that Germany seek colonies abroad. Plus, Germany is not in a geographically advantageous position for overseas exploration relative to Britain, France, Spain, or Portugal. Russia's attendance at the conference might surprise you as well, but Russia tried to establish a colony on Madagascar during the reign of Peter the Great. This failed because Madagascar's interior was not well understood, at least not well understood by people who typically thrive in sub-zero temperatures, and the mission lost its financing. A second attempt was made by Russian explorer Nikolai Achinov, who established a small colony called Sagalo in present-day Djibouti. His goal was to explore and trade with Abyssinia, now Ethiopia, since both Russia and Ethiopia were and are majority Orthodox Christian nations. How fascinating, right? Two countries we maybe don't think of together, let alone having something in common. But common religious practice will help Ethiopia avoid colonization, as we'll see in a moment. Unfortunately for Achinov, the French already claimed the area and attacked his colony, and Moscow responded by leaving Achinov to his fate. Sweden, Norway, and Denmark attended because of previous claims to the coast along modern-day Ghana. The Ottoman Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire both had territories in North Africa and therefore were invited to the conference. Spain is known more for its colonization of parts of the US and Latin America, but they also had claims to parts of the coast bending along the Gulf of Guinea. But what was weird is the colony wasn't governed from Madrid, but rather administered from near Buenos Aires. Spain also claimed ownership to Western Sahara, parts of Morocco, and the Canary Islands, which are still part of Spain today, but we're not going into those details. The United States attended because Liberia was created as a place for freed slaves to relocate. Liberia was never actually a U.S. colony. The U.S. government never obtained colonies in Africa, and if you're thinking about Puerto Rico and Guam, the U.S. didn't acquire them until 1898, over 10 years in the future from the Berlin Conference. Out of the whole continent, Ethiopia and Liberia stand as the minority of nations that were not colonized by Europeans. Ethiopia, then called Abyssinia, is a unique case. They figured out an extremely clever way to avoid colonization. Abyssinia was under threat of invasion by the French, Brits, and the Italians. Ethiopian Emperor Menelik II decided to reverse exploit the Europeans by playing these three off of each other. He made concessions with the French, which scared both the Brits and the Italians. The emperor then collected weapons from the Italians, British, and Russians to slowly build up Ethiopian forces. Russia and Abyssinia's common religion meant that Russia recognized Ethiopia's sovereignty, while the other European nations did not, particularly Italy. In December 1894, Abyssinian insurgents attacked an Italian military outpost in Italian Eritrea, a strip of land sandwiched between Abyssinia and the Red Sea. Italy responded by launching an attack on Abyssinia, marking the start of the First Italo-Ethiopian War in January 1895. The Ethiopians, armed with a mix of guns, swords, and shields, absolutely took the Italians to the cleaners and affirmed their independence. Ethiopia's relationship with Russia, diplomacy with arguably the two stronger powers, Britain and France, and their deception of the Italians into thinking that the Ethiopians were more primitive than they really were, in my opinion, was a game well played by the Ethiopians. What about Belgium? The Congo region was first claimed by France, included in their initial proposal, but Bismarck rejected this because if France took control of the Congo region, the Germans couldn't cross through to their other territories. Congo happened to be centered between Germany's discontiguous colonies. Remember, the Congo region is massive, so it borders a lot of these other disputed spaces. The Belgian government itself didn't send a representative to the Berlin Conference. Instead, the International Congo Association sent Belgian statesmen Gabriel Auguste van der Straeten-Bottas and François-Auguste Baron Lambermont to negotiate on Leopold's behalf. There was a lot of disagreement about who would take control of Congo, but ultimately Leopold's diplomats were successful in persuading the conference that Congo would be taken by Belgium. Oh wait, did I say by Belgium? No. Leopold took Congo as his own personal property, solid, tangible real estate. In fact, it's said that Leopold sported such a prominent stiffy upon gazing at a map of Africa that his advisors started calling this trouser tent the Horn for Africa. And then, by historical telephone, the term became the Horn of Africa. That's where we get both the terms Horn of Africa and horny to mean aroused, because of Leo's pull. You're welcome. The other European powers allowed Leopold to take personal control because he sold them the idea that the International Congo Association would conduct humanitarian work, philanthropy, and free trade. A few things I want to say about the Berlin Conference is that it really showcases, highlights, whatever, the arrogance of which European leaders viewed Africa and Africans, especially at that time. Just to carve up a piece of land as if it isn't already inhabited, and to hell with the lives and the wishes of the people already living there. I will also say that you can see some of the seeds of both world wars being planted during the negotiations, which is ironic because armed conflict is what Bismarck ultimately wanted to avoid. Doubly ironic that the conference took place in Berlin. Bismarck maybe bought Europe some time before the First World War, but didn't steer clear of war altogether. And maybe war was inevitable even if the Berlin Conference hadn't happened. I don't know. Impossible to prove a counterfactual. I have a feeling that when secret police eventually returns to Europe, the Berlin Conference will come up again and again. I do know that what I said about the terms Horn of Africa and horny derived from King Leopold's erection was bullshit. Before the conference, roughly 80 to 90% of Africa was free of European control. By 1913, only about 10% of Africa was out of the hands of European governments. That source doesn't specify if that's landmass or population. How exactly does one possess an entire country personally? First, Leopold already laid the groundwork for his plan when Stanley tricked African chiefs into signing away their land. Again, the chiefs had no idea what they were signing or were otherwise lied to or coerced. Roughly 450 chiefs across the Congo River Basin signed such treaties. Each treaty would have said something slightly different, but they followed a pattern. We can thank the Perspectives in History podcast for finding the contents of one of these treaties. And I'll quote, "Each of the signed chiefs agrees to freely give up of their own accord for themselves and for their heirs and successors forever to give to the International Association of the Congo the sovereignty and all sovereign and governing rights within all their territories, and to assist by labor or otherwise any works, improvements, or expeditions which the said association shall cause at any time to be carried out in any part of these territories." End quote. I mean, this could be in one of those Apple agreements giving Tim the right to cook your property, and most of us wouldn't even know. So if you're wondering why anybody would sign this, we do it all the time. The second method Leopold used to obtain Congo was by gaining international recognition. He pushed the narrative that, through the Congo Association, his endeavors were pure, wholesome, and to the benefit of the Congolese people. Leopold made his pitch first to the American government. He assigned American businessman Henry Shelton Sanford to make the case for the Congo Association. Sanford owned a thriving citrus fruit plantation in Florida and had previous experience as the ambassador to Belgium during the American Civil War. In November 1883, even before the Berlin Conference, Sanford traveled to the United States to meet with then-President Chester A. Arthur to make the case that the United States could be granted free trade agreements in Congo. Sanford also suggested that the new Congo could be a democratic haven on the continent and that the Arab slave trade would be extinguished. That latter argument resonated in a country fresh off a civil war largely fought over the issue of slavery. Sanford also appealed to members of Congress. He argued that Congo could be a destination for emancipated former slaves from the United States, something akin to Liberia. This was most appealing to certain Southern congressmen like Senator John Tyler Morgan from Alabama, a former slave owner and Confederate Army general himself. In the 1880s, nearly 20 years following the Civil War, millions of emancipated former slaves still resided in the southern states. And I don't think it's any secret that living in the South in the 1880s wasn't exactly biscuits and gravy. To Senator Morgan, a Congo Free State could be the opportunity for a mass exodus of the freed black population from the South. In 1884, Senator Morgan motioned to formally recognize the Congo Association's claim on Congo. In April of that year, the U.S. Secretary of State decreed that the U.S. would recognize the association's sovereignty over Congo, and the association flag would be recognized as that of a friendly government. The flag was to be a sky blue banner with a single golden star in the center. American recognition was important, yes. However, Leopold needed to get the other European colonizers on board, particularly the French, who were totally unaware that Leopold was pulling off this massive grift. But the French thought that because of the Congo Association's supposed humanitarian mission, that they would eventually go bankrupt and sell off assets, including Congo itself. The French feared that in this scenario, the association would sell the country to Great Britain. Man, just selling a country like an item on a balance sheet. You know, I cringe at the thought of slave auctions, but Leopold was on another level, potentially selling a whole country full of Africans instead of individual people. Like, this is ridiculous. It's like Costco for slaves. Buy them in bulk. Leopold negotiated with France through a British art dealer named Arthur Stevens. The French recognized the Congo Association's claim on two conditions. The first being that the Congo Association was never permitted to sell assets to a foreign power. And two, Henry Morton Stanley was to be dismissed from any further duties in Congo and within the association. Leopold agreed to these terms in April 1884. That date and the time Leopold was convincing the Americans of his cause was before the November start of the Berlin Conference, so Leopold made significant strides in his claim before the actual meeting. This is probably a good time to answer why Stanley was dismissed from duty. Frankly, he was a dickhead too. He did a lot of exploration in Africa, but sure as hell treated neither the native Africans nor his own compatriots with any respect. When interacting with African natives, Stanley used David Blaine level tricks to impress upon them that the white man was superior. He used a magnifying glass to light a cigar with the sun's rays. Stanley would also give natives a gun and asked to be shot. Of course, the gun wasn't loaded. The natives would shoot Stanley, who would fall to the ground. He'd stand back up and shake a bullet out of his shoe, which he definitely placed there beforehand. What's appropriate music for this kind of nonsense? I imagine him linking his thumbs and forefingers together like a chain, saying, "Behold the power of the white man!" Then he throws his hands behind his head, unlinks his fingers, and then reveals his hands to the natives like, "The white man is a god and bullets cannot harm us." The natives then freak out. and do whatever Stanley wants, like signing their land away. I mean, he clearly had a low opinion of these people, but wasn't much better with his own explorers, who he whipped mercilessly when they stepped out of line. And if you think like, wow, how could anybody fall for Stanley's magic bullshit? I would bet that had you lit a cigar on fire with a magnifying glass in medieval Europe, they'd think you were a sorcerer. The final piece of Leopold's plan to affirm his claim to Congo was the Berlin Conference, where, as we learned, the other major colonizers agreed to the association's ownership of the land. Leopold declared his new domain the Congo Free State, which is like if North Korea rebranded to More Than Enough Food Korea. It was just for appearances to peddle the charade. All the costs associated with appointing governors of the various Congolese regions and other logistics were paid for out of Leo's personal fortune. Which begs the question, how rich was King Leopold? Well, unfortunately, I'm not 100% sure what Leopold's net worth was leading up to the acquisition of the Congo Free State. Safe to assume king levels of money. According to a 2019 Business Insider ranking of Europe's 10 richest royal families, King Philippe of Belgium is worth $14 million, which I know is a lot of money for most of us. But as far as millionaires go, that's not a lot. Mitt Romney is wealthier. The same article ranked the late Queen Elizabeth II at number 4 with a net worth of something like $500 to $600 million. According to a July 2024 article in the Brussels Times, they estimated that the Belgian government will have spent roughly $43.3 million on its monarchy. That's not all personal wealth because there are royal obligations, travel costs, staff, buildings, and maintenance. This probably isn't a good representation of Leopold's wealth, but we'll use it as a tenuous benchmark. What we do have is an estimate of the wealth Leopold gained from squeezing Congo of resources and blood. Adam Hochschild, in his book titled King Leopold's Ghost, a story of greed, terror, and heroism in colonial Africa, first published in 1998, cites Belgian historian Jules Marchal, who estimated that roughly 220 million francs, or $2.1 billion in today's currency, was the total amount of revenue that Leopold extracted from Congo during his rule of the Congo Free State. If we assume Leo had full ownership of Congo following the conference in 1884, and he died in 1909, dude had 25 years to suckle the cash cow's teat, making nearly $85 million a year. Almost twice that of what the Belgian taxpayers spent on their monarchy in 2024, adjusted for inflation. Leopold's other revenue source was roughly 100 million francs worth of government-issued bonds, worth nearly $200 million today. Leopold generated so much cash that he built up and embroidered Brussels, the city of Antwerp, and others. Leopold commissioned so many construction projects that he became known as the Builder King. Preparing Congo for commercial viability wasn't exactly a walk in the park, more like a walk in the rainforest, which was just as miserable as it sounds. For all the beauty that Congo offers, there are dangers lurking to gobble up a white guy or two. Inhospitable terrain, punishing heat and humidity. Even the best roads were melted into mud by the rain. Jungles inhabited by gorillas, snakes, spiders, and other wildlife that posed a real threat to any unfortunate explorer. For a born and raised Belgian, they might as well have landed on the moon. It was soon discovered that, intermingled between the beauty and the terror, were an abundance of rubbers. That's right, condoms. See, Leopold needed a steady supply of custom-made condoms fitted to be as inversely correlated to the size of his beard as possible. Okay, that's not true, but they did find an abundance of rubber trees. And I don't mean trees made of rubber, but trees that produce the raw material needed to make rubber. Both rubber and ivory in particular were what helped Leopold generate such immense revenues. According to the Biographics YouTube channel, rubber was in high demand, but there was very little supply, so Leopold essentially discovered a gold mine. According to an overview of the rubber market from the Economic History Association, as early as the 1830s, Charles Goodyear invented a process to make rubber a more durable and viable material for industrial use. The article paraphrases work by historians Barbara Weinstein and Warren Dean, stating, quote, It was then that natural rubber became suitable for producing hoses, tires, industrial bands, sheets, shoes, shoe soles, and other products. What initially caused the beginning of the rubber boom, however, was the popularization of the bicycle. The boom would then be accentuated after 1900 by the development of the automobile industry and the expansion of the tire industry to produce car tires, end quote. Yeah, demand for rubber got a huge shot in the arm via widespread adoption of automobiles and increased demand during the First and Second World Wars. Additionally, rubber trees grow only in tropical climates like the Amazon rainforest, Congo, and Southeast Asia. In Congo, the species Landolphia owariensis is most common, to the best of my knowledge, but I'm no botanist. Similar to the process of extracting sugar, like when we discussed in the Tonton Macoute episode, which you should totally check out by the way, extracting rubber is highly labor intensive. These days, specific plots are selected for planting and existing vegetation is removed. That means trees are cut down to make way for the desired crop. The baby plants have to be cut and planted a certain way in square holes. They're picky little bastards. Once the trees are a little bit more grown, some of the offshoots are snipped and the upper leaves are tied together, which helps focus the tree's energy to the trunk. Once the tree is matured, workers carefully mark several spirals around the trunk like the threads of a screw. They use a special tool to carve out a no more than 6 millimeter deep spiral out of the tree. Over the next several hours, milky white liquid latex will flow into a small bowl. Workers then collect the contents from each bowl and add the liquid to a larger container, strain, and pick out any impurities. Now, really quick, the liquid is further processed by drying, pressing into sheets, manually picking out bits of plant matter and insects. It's smoked, formed, heated, and stretched into raw product. It's a whole process that the Congo Free State will turn into an absolute nightmare. A nightmare fueled by the Force Publique. According to historian Bryant P. Shaw's 1984 PhD thesis, the term force publique, or public force in English, was a common term used in French law. His thesis states, quote, "The term force publique had appeared in late 18th century French administrative law and was included in the 1831 Belgian constitution. Throughout the 19th century, force publique was an accepted tenet of European jurisprudence," end quote. In the 1831 Belgian Constitution, Section 5, titled De la Force Publique in French, or of the public force in English, outlines the rules and regulations for recruitment, maintenance, and conduct of the Belgian army and police. These administrative legalese would have been familiar to Leopold, who loosely based the Congo Free State's legal framework off of Belgium's. Leopold may have claimed the Congo Free State as his domain, but it needed both protection from external threats and internal law enforcement. Applying Belgium's legal framework to the Congo Free State meant its army and police would take the name Force Publique. Leopold instituted the Force Publique inside the Congo Free State in 1885. They were structured like an army with different units based on each of the Congo's regions: Leopoldville, Katanga, and the Kasai regions, to name a few. Over time, each region's Force Publique organized into distinctive rifle battalions. Overall, the Congo Free State bureaucracy was divided into 3 departments or ministries that included Interior, Foreign Affairs, and Finance. Each department was headed by an administrator general. The bureaucracy was further divided into lower-ranking administrators such as directors general. It's unclear to me how the Force Publique integrated into this web on paper. You'd think they'd be part of the Interior Department, but that doesn't seem to be the case. However, several sources indicate that the European Force Publique officers reported to lower-level bureaucrats like the Directors General, who then reported further up the bureaucracy. One thing to take away from the structure is that there was a line of information from the ground directly to King Leopold II. I can't emphasize enough that despite the establishment of a recognized Congo Free State, that the situation on the ground was a lot more complicated. The Congo Free State, like today's DRC, was massive, nearly 80 times the size of Belgium, most of it unexplored twists of vines, trees, and wild animals never witnessed to a European. Most of the land was controlled by native chiefs or used by Arab slave traders. To further muddy the waters, in addition to the Force Publique, there were several unnamed private militias and mercenary groups participating in the rubber terror brought to the Congolese people. The Force Publique first recruited volunteers. The commissioned and non-commissioned officer ranks were typically Belgian, but individuals from other parts of Europe, like Switzerland or Scandinavia, also joined the Force Publique. Regular soldiers were made up of recruits or slaves from Nigeria, Zanzibar, and some Congolese locals, also known as askaris. Cost estimates show that the Congo Free State purchased Force Publique conscripts at a rate of 1 to 10 pounds sterling. Recruits were transported away from their homes in filthy conditions and only fed plain rice twice a day, no water, and exposed to the heat and humidity. Not all survived to their final destination. The Force Publique first avoided recruiting Congolese people because it was thought that they would not be able to enforce state objectives with maximum brutality. People from other countries likely would have no connection to the Congolese people and would therefore be more willing to carry out repression. Occasionally, the Force Publique recruited Congolese troops, but only from tribes that other Congolese people feared. For example, one of the tribes that the Force Publique recruited from was the Bangala tribe. According to a Central Intelligence Agency document produced in October 1964 and released in April 2000, which outlines the numerous Congolese tribes, the Bangala people are mostly subsistence farmers of various crops, including bananas. They fish extensively since they live around the convergence of the Congo and Ubangi rivers. They are known to trade with other tribes. Women and men have distinct roles, sort of what you would expect. Men hunt and clear land while women tend to the crops. However, both men and women partake in fishing. The report notes that the Bangala don't have a unified state, but the adult males run the villages by the leadership of a headman who can act as a judge and is typically the wealthiest or most respected member of the tribe. The CIA report also notes that the Bangala are warlike and are known to partake in cannibalism, often taking the heads of their enemies as trophies. The report notes that there were over 100,000 Bangala tribespeople in 1907, and I am unsure of their status in 2025 or their current customs. But back when the Force Publique was recruiting Congolese tribes, they deliberately selected men from those most feared and warlike. Estimates of the Force Publique's total strength vary by source, but the number of members ranges from 10,000 to 40,000 depending on state need, either internal policing or deploying troops to the battlefield. And we'll get to that a bit later. Force Publique uniforms differed by rank. The Belgian and European officers in the Congo Free State wore white uniforms at least up until 1914. The lower-ranked African-born soldiers wore a navy blue uniform outlined with a red trim and a red fez as headdress. They also carried a leather cartridge box on the waist. Standard-issue weapons included the Italian-designed and English-modified 11mm single-shot Albini Braindlin rifle, which was adopted by the Belgian army in 1867, and a bayonet. Some units of the Force Publique carried better and less dated weapons, such as submachine guns and cannons. Weapons and equipment were not always kept up to date since Leopold wanted to run the Force Publique as cheaply as possible. The purpose of the Force Publique was to preserve the Congo Free State's quote-unquote sovereignty from foreign incursions and maintain the labor force inside the state. Leopold would maximize his profits via the use of slave labor, coerced by the Force Publique. This is such a unique structure from some of the other secret police we've met because they aren't under the direct control of the government per se, but rather the monarch, who is part of the government by the design of Belgium's constitutional monarchy. But what the Force Publique does have in common here with other secret police is their involvement in commercial activities. There really isn't any ideological motivation behind Leopold or the Force Publique other than the almighty dollar. In this case, francs. Congolese slaves had to meet strict quotas of rubber production, and it was a matter of life or death for themselves, their families, and their communities. The Force Publique inflicted punishment when quotas were not met. Many of the methods that I will describe derive from George Washington Williams' direct observations. Failure to meet quotas or obey the Force Publique meant numerous lashings with the chicote, a long rope of dried hippopotamus hide. Those who refused to work would be stripped naked and tied face down across two logs, bound at the shins and the wrists. A soldier lashed the victim's back with the chicote until the person's back resembled a bloody puddle, a glistening section of spine above the blood, like a log floating in water. Entire villages that refused to harvest rubber were burned to the ground. Men had their heads cut off. Women and children were either hung or held captive as property of the state and later sold into agricultural or sexual slavery. It wasn't uncommon for the European Force Publique officers to assault Congolese women, and because the women were considered state property, the offspring of these assaults were also considered state property. The Force Publique's preferred method of execution was to simply shoot its victims. However, the officers needed proof that the rank-and-file soldiers weren't hunting, stockpiling ammunition, or otherwise misusing weapons. Therefore, the Force Publique required one severed hand for each person shot, one hand for one bullet. The Force Publique carried out so many of these types of executions that baskets full of severed hands were needed to account for expended ammunition. Each soldier needed to reconcile their till, so to speak. Some Force Publique soldiers were so desperate to inflict punishment or prove they were enforcing the state's will that they cut off the hands of people who would never be executed. Conditions for the Force Publique soldiers themselves weren't much better. George Washington Williams noted that, quote, "From the mouth of the Congo River to its headwaters, here at the 7th Cataract, a distance of 1,448 miles, there is not a solitary hospital for Europeans, and only 3 sheds for sick Africans in the service of the state, not fit to be occupied by a horse," end quote. Williams noted that sick soldiers would probably die on board their vessels at the mouth of the Congo River if it weren't for, quote, "the humanity of the Dutch trading company at that place, who had often opened their private hospital to the sick of other countries," end quote. How bad does your situation need to be for you to look out at the sea and say, "Thank God for the Dutch trading company"? Sick and injured soldiers, both European and African, laid on muddy roads left to succumb to their disease, rot, and be picked apart by animals. Proper burials were far and few between. Europeans died in their barracks, and the African soldiers slept on beds made of bamboo. The only food available to them was rice and fish. European soldiers complained that letters to loved ones back home were never shipped out of the Congo Free State. Some Force Publique soldiers were captured by hostile Congolese tribes and either buried alive or eaten. The Force Publique responded by torching entire villages and slaughtering the inhabitants. Other travelers and Christian missionaries documented their experience in the Congo Free State and corroborated the level of horrors the Congolese people were subjected to. Joseph Conrad, author of Heart of Darkness, described a Belgian military officer of the Force Publique named Leon Rom. Rom is said to have kept the decomposing heads of more than 20 Congolese men in his garden and had a makeshift hangman's noose in his office. Rom was portrayed in the 2016 film The Legend of Tarzan by Christoph Waltz. Alice Seeley Harris, born in England in 1870, was a missionary in the Congo Free State between 1898 and 1901. Alice captured hundreds of photographs to document the atrocities committed in the Congo Free State. Her most famous photo is one of a man named Nsala sitting on a porch step with one elbow resting on his knee, his head tilted down and eyes nearly expressionless, like dark windows into the soul of a broken man. Because placed in front of him are a small hand and a foot. For failing to meet his rubber quota, the Force Publique kidnapped and killed Nsala's 5-year-old daughter and returned her hand and foot as a warning. The rest of her body was cooked and her flesh consumed by soldiers of the Force Publique. There are so many photos of countless others with one or both hands missing, people bound by their necks in chains, people thrashed by the chicote. Back in Belgium, for all of Leopold's willingness to travel in search of a colony, venturing to Egypt, Asia, and the United States, Leopold never once bothered to visit the one place where he was responsible for so much pain, and never set foot in the Congo Free State to look at his disaster straight in its hideous face. In 1892, war broke out between Arab slave traders and the Congo Free State when the slave traders attacked several posts and personnel in the eastern regions. Under the leadership of Colonel Francis Dennis, the Force Publique engaged the Arab slave traders for nearly 2 years and scored a victory. But victory wouldn't contain rumors about atrocities in the Congo Free State. Eventually, word got back to the Belgian government about what was going on, and they were understandably horrified. Alice Seeley Harris compiled her photographs and submitted a report to King Leopold that went unread. Stories emerged from several Christian missionaries who corroborated Harris's findings. George Washington Williams' open letter to King Leopold was the first thorough account of atrocities and attempted to blow the lid off Leopold's mass murderous grift. In addition to the barbarism that took place in the Congo Free State, Williams revealed that the state was repeatedly violating contracts set with soldiers, workmen, and others employed by the Congo Association. The Congo Free State charged its trading partners with tariffs, but Belgian companies were exempt, and that the state bought and sold slaves. Ending slavery was one of the main reasons Leopold touted for being there in the first place. I think by stop the slave trade, Leopold meant stop and ask the slave traders for directions to the nearest and largest group of black people to buy and sell. Williams was inspired to visit Congo the year prior when he was granted an interview with King Leopold and bought into the king's supposed humanitarian mission. I imagine Williams trying to ask a serious question, but Leopold can't help but daydream. Your Majesty, thank you for granting me your time, and it's an honor to be here. I want to start with the details of your plans in the independent state of Congo. Your humanitarian aims are to build schools, hospitals, roads, and rails to improve the lives of the Congolese. Your Majesty, these are incredibly ambitious goals. When can the Congolese expect these projects to be completed? And how are you paying for them? God, I want to enslave this guy so bad right now. I wonder how much those Arabs would pay me for an American journalist. Oh shit, I don't know what he's asking. I don't have to listen to somebody with that much melanin. Just smile and nod, he should be done soon. What the hell is he even talking about? Your Majesty, how are you improving the lives of the Congolese? You know what, Mr. Williams? Give me 5 francs and I'll tell you. Williams left Congo for a return trip to England, and at some point on the journey, he contracted tuberculosis. The infection exacerbated an injury he sustained in combat during the Civil War. Williams died on the 2nd of August, 1891, in Blackpool, England, where he is buried. At the time, Williams had a near equal reputation and heavyweight status as a black historical figure as somebody like Frederick Douglass, especially since he was a veteran and served in the Ohio House of Representatives. However, his notoriety became obscured over time. Later works, such as The Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, told of the atrocities in Congo but didn't credit Williams. Rumors existed of the goings-on in Congo, but that's all they were, rumors and allegations. Leopold needed a way to acquire new investors in his project and garner public support. The 1897 World's Fair in Brussels provided Leopold with an opportunity. Leopold had roughly 260 Congolese men, women, and children kidnapped from the Congo Free State and forcibly relocated to Brussels, specifically in the suburb of Tervuren, to be part of the colonial exhibit where 60 of these people were put on display in a Congo-esque enclosure to be gawked at by spectators. 7 of the Congolese people kept in this exhibit didn't survive. From May to November, thousands of people got in line to witness the Congolese human zoo, tossing them bits of food and candy. The Royal Museum for Central Africa estimated that during the peak summer season between June to August, the Congo exhibit received roughly 40,000 visitors per day. Among those who were relocated to Brussels were roughly 90 members of the Force Publique to guard the human zoo and perform parades for the fairgoers. I did some digging and found one source, America's Best History, that notes the price of admission to the Brussels World's Fair in 1897 was 4 Belgian francs, or roughly $30 in today's money. If the Congo exhibit had about 40,000 visitors per day, that would amount to about $1.2 million a day for 3 months, assuming the fair was open every day. So they're raking it in with this exhibit, degrading human beings for profit. Classic Leo. Already Leopold's reputation as a monarch was in question. Around 1899, Leopold started an affair with a woman named Caroline Lacroix, who would be his companion until the end of his life. By the way, she was 16 and he was 65. The Belgian media discovered the affair, and the Belgian public was apparently more bothered by this than the allegations of atrocities in the Congo Free State. Whatever sticks, right? Oh, and Caroline had 2 boys who were maybe Leopold's. It's disputed. There's a political cartoon from the time that shows Leopold, Caroline, and a priest. Leopold is shown groping Caroline's breast while his head is turned towards the priest with a shocked expression, as if they were just caught. The caption says, "Abbot, oh, sire, at your age?" Leopold responds with, "You should try it for yourself." Yuck. Hey, he's just like his dad, who, remember, also had an extramarital affair with a woman much younger than him. Wow. Some men have a type. Sometimes type 2 diabetes. It's just satire, but that seems on brand for him. All that's missing is a cash prize. Look, if you're 16, don't shack up with a 65-year-old. And if you're 65, don't shack up with the 16-year-old. Pretty simple. Because it's not just a truck full of yuck, it's a felony. Okay, finally. British consul Roger Casement wrote a report in 1903 documenting his extensive travels in the Congo River Basin and interviews. Casement included his own personal experience with Henry Morgan Stanley and emphasized the atrocities committed by the Congo Free State and the Force Publique. He published his work known as the Casement Report in 1904, and people were pissed. Even the British, the world's most spectacular colonizers, were like, bruh. Estimates vary quite a bit in terms of the total number of deaths in the Congo Free State, directly or indirectly in pursuit of the state's aims. Sources provide a range from 4 million to 10 or 20 million killed, and it's impossible to know with certainty. Not to mention the countless humans who were mutilated, displaced, or sold into slavery. Public opinion of Leopold and his management of the Congo Free State wouldn't be salvageable. Also not salvageable was Leopold's private claim to the Congo region. In October 1908, the Belgian parliament voted to annex the Congo Free State due to the massive international outrage over what happened to the Congolese. I use the word annex loosely because it wasn't like the Belgians invaded the private property of the king. Instead, they paid him roughly 50 million francs for him to cede control to the parliament. The Belgian government, however, viewed the Congolese people as needing care and would not admit Congolese representatives on the legislature. Tribal chiefs and regional rulers would be used to collect taxes and recruit laborers for the Belgian government. So instead of Congo being treated like a human slaughterhouse, it would be treated like a colony. So not great. And why French, not Dutch, became the dominant language spoken in Congo is because French was used as the language of formal communication in Belgium, as well as the language spoken by the Belgian elite. As for the Force Publique, they continued to serve the Belgian government. The first order of business was to reorganize and discipline the force. I would argue this process is when the Force Publique became less of a secret police and more of a military force, a colonial army. The Belgian government, though more competent than Leopold, still approached running the army on as low of a budget as possible. But we're still going to see them through the rest of this episode because their story isn't done. But before we continue with that, let's see what's going on with Leopold. With his pet project out of hand, Leopold turned his attention to the defense of Belgium. This was one of his main priorities even before acquiring a colony, but growing German power caught his attention. Kaiser Wilhelm II also basically told Leo to his face that Belgium was fair game for invasion if it were strategically necessary. The Kaiser wasn't kidding, because it was later discovered that the Germans crafted an invasion plan known as the Schlieffen Plan after Field Marshal Alfred von Schlieffen, which included the violation of Belgian sovereignty en route to France. Leopold told the Kaiser that he'd enthusiastically sell Belgium for 100 million francs. He didn't say that, actually, but maybe he thought it. The Belgian military strengthened their alliances with France and Great Britain, and Leopold urged that his country make an effort to strengthen defensive positions and fortifications. In December 1909, King Leopold was suddenly afflicted with some unspecified illness, possibly something cardiac-related. He lived long enough to sign off on national conscription, passed by Parliament. Then Leopold died on December 17th, 1909, at the age of 74. The first real test of the new Force Publique's newfound reorganization came at the outbreak of World War I. The start of the First World War is credited to the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of the Austro-Hungarian Empire in June 1914. This sparked long-standing imperial rivalries and a web of alliances leading to war over the ensuing months. The very mention of World War I invokes images of muddy trenches, barbed wire, and the unholy mating of 19th century tactics with 20th century technology. However, in Africa, things played out quite a bit differently. Overall, the African continent got pulled into World War I because of colonial rivalry. Tactically, while France, Great Britain, and Germany fought over mere meters, the African battlefields were mobile within vast swaths of territory. An article in the Commonwealth War Graves writes, quote, eschewing the major set-piece battles of the Western and Eastern fronts, the war in East Africa was one of movement, attempted sweeping envelopments, long marches into the African interior, and guerrilla ambush warfare. Compared within the confined trench warfare of the Western Front, the fighting in Africa could be ranged across vast areas, covering many different climates and terrains. All told, the war in East Africa saw skirmishes and battles take place across much of modern-day Kenya, Mozambique, Malawi, Zambia, Rwanda, Burundi, and Tanzania. Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck, the German commander of forces in German East Africa, launched his attacks in August 1914 on British positions around Mount Kilimanjaro and Lake Victoria. End quote. Lettow-Vorbeck figured he could tie down Allied troops in Africa who would otherwise be deployed against Germany in Europe. But also in August 1914, Germany launched their invasion of France through Belgium, following the Schlieffen Plan, just as the Kaiser warned Leopold. In the Belgian Congo, the new army of the Force Publique fought the Germans in the eastern part of the country. The Force Publique's Katanga battalion were highly effective on the battlefields of Rwanda, Burundi, and Tanzania, earning the respect of German, Portuguese, and British troops. Germany's defeat meant they had to sign onto the Versailles Treaty, which meant they had to cede their colonial assets to Belgium. During the interwar years, historian Martin Thomas indicates that the Belgian colonial government split the Force Publique into two divisions, one to guard Congo's borders and the other to manage internal security. Skipping ahead to May 1940, when Nazi Germany invaded and occupied Belgium, the Belgian Congo contributed troops and raw materials for the Allies. The Force Publique fought the Italians in East Africa and opened transportation routes to funnel troops and materials. They also established a Force Publique Air Force in October 1940. Congo exported various metals and rubber for investment into the defeat of Hitler. One very crucial metal mined out of the Shinkalobwe mine in the Katanga region was uranium. This particularly rich source provided roughly 2/3 of the Manhattan Project's needed uranium, and it was Congolese uranium that eviscerated Hiroshima in August 1945. Following the end of World War II in 1945 until Congo's independence, the Force Publique locked in and transformed into a disciplined army that impressed visitors with their parades. Gone were the days of murderous bands mutilating the Congolese people. The Chicote hippopotamus whip was banned from use in 1955. African natives were still not allowed to enter officer training until closer to 1960. By 1960, the Force Publique, for all intents and purposes, was the Army of Congo, not so much resembling a secret police organization. On June 30th, 1960, Congo gained independence from Belgium and they lived happily ever after. No problems exist in Congo because it's a tropical paradise on Earth, and how I wish that were true. The DRC's first elected prime minister was a 35-year-old man named Patrice Lumumba, who wouldn't exactly have a fortunate hand in holding Congo together. Almost immediately after independence, the Force Publique soldiers launched a mutiny against the Belgian officer corps. The coup sparked fears among the remaining Belgian and European residents in Congo that the Force Publique would round them up and party like it's 1889. The Belgian military chose to intervene in the conflict, which was seen as a violation of Congo's newfound sovereignty. However, Belgium's aim was to ensure the safety of its own citizens. Soon after the military intervention in Congo, on July 8, 1960, the Force Publique was reorganized into the Congolese National Army with an all-African command and officer corps. Now, in addition to the prime minister position, the new DRC also had a president, its first being Joseph Kasavubu. Both men disagreed on the role of government. Lumumba favored a strong central government, and Kasavubu favored stronger regional governments. The disagreements reached a flashpoint when Kasavubu deposed Lumumba, and then Lumumba, Uno reverse card, deposed Kasavubu. Keep in mind, this happened during the Cold War when the United States and the Soviet Union competed for influence in recently independent former colonies, and we know that Congo contains vast natural resources. With Lumumba and Kasavubu at odds, the Congolese army intervened. The army was led by a young former sergeant of the Force Publique, Colonel Mobutu Sese Seko, or Joseph Mobutu. Lumumba was placed on house arrest, but he escaped and tried to make a break for another region. He was caught and arrested by the army, tortured, and taken to the Katanga region where he was executed by firing squad, allegedly in the presence of Belgian officers. Lumumba's body was tossed into a grave, but later dug up, hacked into pieces, doused with sulfuric acid, and set on fire for that Force Publique finishing move shit. A last gasp of the 19th century. It's a little more complicated with very sketchy details and foreign actors, but Congo independence was not off to a good start. The Democratic Republic of Congo has seen its fair share of trouble since 1960. Under Joseph Mobutu, Congo rebranded to Zaire, and the people were made to forego their French names in favor of traditionally African ones. Mobutu himself set up his own personal fiefdom. He continued to extract wealth from the country by payments from foreign companies wanting to do business there. He did the classic dictator move where cash was funneled to himself and his close supporters, while Congo's little existing infrastructure was neglected. Inflation, corruption, and a shaky system of property rights plagued the country. In 1994, refugees fleeing the Rwandan genocide spilled into Congo. The United Nations Refugee Agency estimates that approximately 2 million people were displaced from Rwanda and fled to neighboring Burundi, Uganda, Tanzania, and Congo. Many of the chief perpetrators of the genocide fled to Congo in the mix of escaping civilians. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people fleeing into a country that didn't have the infrastructure to support them in the first place. The rest of the 1990s for Congo saw the outbreaks of the First and Second Congo Wars, some of the deadliest conflicts at that time since World War II. The Second Congo War ended in 2003, and down in hell, while all this was going on, Leopold's gooning to the whole situation until he realizes he won't make a quick buck. Today, Congo still relies on extractive industries with the help of China as a trading partner. However, extraction of minerals comes at a human cost. Take cobalt mining, for example. Why is cobalt important? Well, cobalt's properties make it a crucial metal for batteries. Amnesty International wrote a piece in September of 2023 explaining the rising demand for this metal. Quote, "The average electric vehicle battery requires more than 13 kilograms of cobalt, and a mobile phone battery about 7 grams. Demand for cobalt is expected to reach 222,000 tons by 2025, having tripled since 2010, end quote. The article goes on to demonstrate that these mining companies in Congo displace entire neighborhoods as mining operations expand. Child labor, sexual assault, and dangerous conditions are commonplace, not to mention cobalt exposure itself. Cobalt is one of the metals you never want to be exposed to in large quantities or chronically. According to a hazardous substances fact sheet published by the New Jersey Department of Health, cobalt should be handled as a carcinogen. Finely cut bits of cobalt are easily combustible. Cobalt can irritate the skin, and particles entering the lungs can cause fibrosis. It's nasty stuff. Dirty mining propping up the clean energy industry. Every time you read something about clean energy tech or initiatives, while it's important that us humans diversify our energy sources, we should ask ourselves where the materials for these technologies are being sourced. And let's just be honest about it. The metals in our phones, cars, and airplane engines were likely mined by a kid in an open-step mine in Central Africa. That's reality. It's a highly inconvenient truth, and sadly baked into Congo's history, basically since the Portuguese sailed up the mouth of the Congo River. Let's do some exploration. What do the Congolese think of King Leopold and Belgium more broadly? Well, unfortunately, the feelings of the average person in the DRC are difficult to find. In the DRC, according to Data Reportal, only about 27% of the DRC's population have internet access in a country of roughly 102 million people. We can compare this to at least 95% of the population in Belgium being active internet users. However, the population of Belgium is about 11 million, and 27% of the DRC's population is about 28 million active users. More than twice the number of active internet users in Congo than Belgium. But apparently, the Congolese don't spend a lot of time on Reddit threads answering questions like, what do the Congolese think of King Leopold and Belgium? But there are some forums I found where this is discussed. There's an old Quora thread on the question of, quote, how did the Congolese think of Belgium and Belgians today? The answer from user Fabrice Kabongo is probably the best, who said 6 years ago that, quote, it depends. Some still feel resentment, probably a big chunk of the population, and want payback. Another chunk just stopped to care and are turned toward a more English-inspired culture, and for those, Belgium is relevant, and they are completely disconnected, like me. Another group dreams of escaping DRC and want to live in Belgium. Most agree that Belgians still act like kings in Congo, individually, not as a country. In my last trip to Congo, I see the pretentious attitude of most Belgians that live there. Really disturbing, end quote. But if you're listening to this and are Congolese or have some relationship to the DRC, I'd love to hear from you. My contact info is in the episode notes. We'll get to a sample of Belgian opinions in just a moment. The Congolese army today is a distant offspring or derivative of the Force Publique created in 1885 to police the Congo Free State. The armed forces have adapted to the Congo's, Zaire's, and the DRC's changing situation over time. Remember, the Force Publique created their air force in 1940 and since have expanded to also include a navy. According to the Army War College, the armed forces of the DRC field an estimated 100,000 active duty troops between the Army, Navy, Air Force, and their Republican Guard. Today, Belgium and the DRC are trading partners, and the Belgian government and monarchy have taken steps to foster normal relations between the two countries. According to the Observatory of Economic Complexity, Belgium exported roughly $466 million worth of products such as vaccines, blood, and other biological products to the DRC, while the DRC exported about $130 million worth of diamonds to Belgium, all in 2022. The current Belgian monarch, King Philippe, made a visit to the DRC in June 2022. The goal was to start a process of reconciliation and set a course for a future many shades lighter than in times past. King Philippe, who is related to King Leopold II in that Leopold's brother was King Philippe's great-great-grandfather, met with Congolese leadership. A 100-year-old Congolese war veteran named Albert Kunyuku gestured towards encouraging private investment and increased educational opportunities, especially into the colonial past. Additionally, it was acknowledged that The Africa Museum contains an estimated 1% of stolen artifacts, while most of the exhibits were purchased or acquired scrupulously, and the remainder are anyone's guess. I feel like tracing back the acquisitions of other countries' artifacts would be so difficult. Like for me, for example, like my mom just told me recently that we have some relatives who took shit from Egypt. Seriously, my great-great-grandfather was a British officer and did a lot of surveying of Egypt, and sometimes he found small artifacts at the sites he visited. And apparently he just casually picked them up, put them in his pocket, and took them home. I don't mean to say that taking art from another country is casual, but the act of finding something cool on the ground and picking it up, one probably wouldn't think twice about, nor document. The Africa Museum has made changes over its lifetime. The museum started with the 1897 Brussels International Expedition in Tervuren, where King Leopold ordered the colonial section exhibit. That section housed live animals, artifacts, and of course, a human zoo, a replica of a Congolese village. The museum and the sprawling garden complex it exists on today was constructed using funds generated from the Congo Free State. Leopold's successor, Albert I, commemorated the opening of the new museum in April 1910 as the Museum of the Congo. The museum's name changed several times in its history, such as the Museum of Belgian Congo, the Royal Museum of Belgian Congo, the Royal Museum of Central Africa. The museum underwent several years of renovation and a change in tone, we will say, in the 2010s, and when it reopened in December 2018, they settled on the Africa Museum. And this is a place that, personally, I would really like to visit. I would love to visit Belgium. I mean, assuming that after I just spent the last hour and a half shitting on your old king, that you guys won't beat my ass about 0.58 seconds after I get off the plane. Based on a sample of Reddit threads and street interviews on how the ordinary Belgian thinks about King Leopold II, opinions are mixed, and I noticed that opinions are split across generational lines. Now, I should say that in general, people who know of King Leopold II know that he was a monster of a human being. I don't think that's any secret. However, the early 2020s sparked renewed conversations about the messier points of his legacy, and whether or not street names should have his name or if statues of the king should exist. That's the quick and dirty version of the contemporary context as I record this in early 2025. In general, again, based on my observed sample, young Belgians despise King Leopold II and his colonial ambitions, while older people also don't have a positive view of the king and recognize his contributions to Belgium at the admittedly steep human cost. For example, Belgium is full of absolutely gorgeous architecture embroidered with gold statues. Leopold, remember, he was called the Builder King for a reason, commissioned many civil projects across the country paid for by revenues from the Congo Free State. I get the impression that if you walk around Brussels or Antwerp, you'll see these constructions. On Reddit, Belgians indicated that King Leopold II and colonization were topics in school, like their equivalent of high school, while for some the topic was barely mentioned, if at all. Others noted that they learned about it in university. It's a mixed bag when it comes to learning about this in Belgian schools. If you are Belgian and want to chime in, please message me, contact info in the show notes. And I'll leave you with this great YouTube comment that I found during this research that I'll share that comes from user at Ray_3367 who said, quote, "Never ask. A woman her age, a man his salary, a Belgian what his grandparents were doing in Congo." End quote. What are my thoughts? Let's start with what I want to argue with this episode. The Force Publique is referenced in many sources as anything but a secret police. They're referred to as mercenaries, a private army, a regular army, but I didn't find a historian or other work that outright denied that the Force Publique could be counted as a secret police. Let's go back to our definition of secret police from the very first episode of this show back in April 2022 when we discussed the Oprichniki. Let's break down the term secret police into its component parts again. A secret is something kept hidden, away, or something known to few people. Police are tasked with maintaining order and enforcing the laws. But law enforcement isn't exactly secret, and even in authoritarian regimes, there's tacit understanding that there are forbidden forms of expression. The secret part is related to the clandestine nature of secret police work. Political police is a more precise definition because these forces have the authority to enforce the political agenda of the administration on the citizens by any means necessary, including terror, torture, re-education, and death. Sheena Chestnut-Greitens, associate professor at the LBJ School at University of Texas at Austin, characterizes such police agencies as coercive institutions, stating, quote, autocrats who aspire to stay in power must address a range of threats, optimizing a coercive apparatus to deal with each type of potential threat, however, would produce different coercive institutional designs for each threat, end quote. So for our purposes here, we can define secret police as a tool for autocratic regimes to enforce the government's political ideology, loyalty to the ruler and supporters, and suppress opposition using any means necessary, again up to and including death. In my view, the Force Publique fit the definition of secret police specifically in the Congo Free State between the years 1885 at their inception and 1908 when the Belgian government took control of Congo from Leopold II. I argue that while King Leopold II ruled by a limited constitutional monarchy in Belgium, he was an absolute monarch in the Congo Free State and ruled via the bureaucracy of the Congo Association, thereby making Congo an autocratic regime. This does beg the question, did Leopold employ secret police at home in Belgium to help keep his power? As far as I could tell, no, he did not. And one thing notably missing from the Force Publique's arsenal was the use of espionage either in Congo or Belgium. Perhaps certain spy techniques were used, but that's not really what the Force Publique was known for. In my opinion, you don't need to be a full-service force like the KGB to still be a secret police, because while these coercive institutions follow the key functions in our definition, each country and government takes a different approach. The whole point is to be amorphous. The political ideology that the Force Publique served to protect wasn't even really a political ideology at all. My view is that King Leopold II was greedy, and the Force Publique served money. They served to protect the economic engine that kept the Congo Free State productive, allowing Leopold to enrich himself and build Belgian infrastructure. The Force Publique suppressed opposition in the form of resistance to slavery on rubber plantations, hostile tribes, and incursions from foreign neighbors. The Force Publique certainly suppressed opposition by any means necessary and established a pattern of chopping off people's hands, killing and eating human beings, and lashing people with the chicote. When the Force Publique stepped away from their role as strictly a secret police started in 1908 when the Congo Free State was abolished. The Force Publique spent the next several decades from 1908 onwards transforming into a professional military. Call them what you want. Mercenaries, militia, monsters. But the Force Publique were the secret police of the Congo Free State from 1885 until 1908. By serving their absolute monarch for the preservation of trade revenues and murdered whoever was a threat to their masters. Let's recap. The Congo region is a highly geographically diverse nation with incredible landscapes from a narrow coastal strip to lush jungles densely populated with incredible wildlife to active volcanic mountains. Congo is one of the richest countries in terms of material wealth and natural resources. Despite this, Congo is one of the poorest countries on Earth, with many people living on much less than $600 per month. It's estimated that humans have lived in this region for thousands of years. One of the first civilizations to rule this region was the Congo Kingdom, founded in 1392. For the inhabitants of this kingdom, their world was turned upside down when in 1483, Portuguese explorers discovered the mouth of the Congo River. The Portuguese explorers sailed up the river and established trade relations with the people of Congo. The ruling elite of the Congo Kingdom adopted some of the Portuguese customs and practices, including Catholicism. By the mid-1500s, the Congo Kingdom was engaged in the slave trade and would capture people from foreign territory as the Congo Kingdom expanded. Portugal viewed the Congo region as its own colony, but other European nations were participating in the scramble for Africa and taking advantage of Portugal's declining power and influence in the world. In the area we call Belgium today, the Roman Empire controlled the lowland countries starting around 57 BC until the 5th century. During this time, the Romans subjected the Belgian people, who staged several failed revolts against the Romans. Roman rule ended in 1486 CE, and the lowlands were ruled by the Franks, the Holy Roman Empire, and later Spain in 1556. Following the Napoleonic Wars, Europe joined together during the Conference of Vienna in 1814 to 1815 to create a long-term peace agreement. One result of this conference was the creation of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, which included the modern territory of Belgium. King William I was, however, a Protestant king in a Catholic nation. Additionally, the working class were discontent with increasing unemployment and the king's tyrannical tendencies. Tensions reached their peak when the southern region of the kingdom broke away. Riots ensued in the city of Brussels and spread. King William sent troops to quell the uprising, but the Belgians stood firm against the Dutch forces and gained independence. The Conference of London was held in 1830 between France, Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia, who agreed to recognize Belgium as an independent kingdom on December 20th, 1830. The Netherlands launched an invasion of Belgium in 1831. The Dutch were unsuccessful, and Belgium instituted their constitution on February 7th, 1831, and declared that the new nation would be a constitutional monarchy. On April 22, 1831, Leopold, a German-born member of the Saxe-Coburg House, was offered the Belgian throne. Leopold was also the uncle of Queen Victoria of Great Britain. And on July 22, 1831, Leopold was formally inaugurated as the first king of Belgium. As a monarch, Leopold I strengthened the Belgian army with the help of England and France as a check against the Dutch. Leopold expanded the education system and granted greater autonomy to both urban and rural regions. He strengthened commercial ties with France and Prussia. In his personal life, Leopold I married Charlotte of Wales in May of 1816. Charlotte died due to complications after giving birth to a stillborn baby in November of 1817. Leopold wouldn't remarry until 1832 to Marie-Louise of Orleans. In April 1835, Leopold I and Marie-Louise would welcome their first son and Leopold's eventual successor, Leopold II. Leopold II was born on April 9th of 1835 and was given the title Duke of Brabant at age 5. He spoke several languages at home, mainly French, and studied with a private tutor for 8 hours a day. He wasn't a great student, but was interested in geography and politics. His mother died when he was just 15, and then at age 18, he married Archduchess Marie Henriette. It said they were an awkward couple and seemed ill-suited. Nevertheless, they had 4 children. Leopold and Marie traveled to various parts of the world early on in their marriage. Leopold developed the idea that Belgium needed to secure a colony in Africa in order to preserve its sovereignty and compete with its European neighbors. He surveyed different parts of the world for a potential Belgian colony. Leopold became enamored with the idea of gaining a colony in Africa. Leopold formed a couple different supposedly philanthropic associations to manage the project and commissioned Henry Morton Stanley to travel through the Congo region and make Congo chiefs sign treaties in which the chiefs were tricked into giving their land to Leopold's Congo Association. In 1884, Belgian diplomats, on behalf of King Leopold II, fooled the other delegates at the Berlin Conference, in which Europe and several other nations with colonial interests split Africa into their respective territories. Leopold was able to take personal possession of Congo as his private property. In 1885, the Congo Free State was established, and shortly thereafter, a security apparatus called the Force Publique. The Force Publique served Leopold and the wider association by providing internal and border security for the state. What ensued was a nightmarish reality for the Congolese. Many were enslaved and forced to work on rubber plantations, which generated incredible wealth for Leopold and Belgium at the cost of millions butchered by the Force Publique. Their soldiers lashed its victims with a whip called the chicote. Several writers, missionaries, and journalists exposed the atrocities in Congo, like George Washington Williams and Alice Seeley Harris. But their warnings went ignored by the Belgian monarchy and the wider community. Once the Casement report was published, it was game over for Leopold, but not before he sold the Congo Free State to the Belgian government for 50 million francs in 1908. Leopold died in 1909, but the Force Publique lived on as the Belgian Congo's military, serving in both Africa campaigns in World War I and World War II. Shortly after Congo's independence, the Force Publique reorganized into the Congolese armed forces. And that, my friends, was the story of the Force Publique. So I have a few announcements, then we'll wrap this up. So my goal is to take Secret Police to the next level in 2025. I'm on the hunt for a new and more powerful computer, really getting my sound editing chops fine-tuned and producing more content for socials. So I have a special announcement for a new series I will be working on this next year. But first, let me tell you where we are headed. Next episode, we are heading to the New World again, across the South Atlantic and through most of South America until we get to a relatively narrow strip of land that crosses much of the continent north to south. We're visiting Chile, a country nearly as long as the US is wide, with a highly diverse landscape, rich and vibrant culture, and an underappreciated up-and-coming wine region. Back in the 1970s, though, Chile was not a place you'd want to live during the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet. We'll be taking a deep dive into our first South American secret police, the Dirección de Inteligencia Nacional, or the DINA, a secret police that spied on and terrorized the Chilean people and opposition across the world. Then we'll head north to the United States. Probably not what you expect. It won't be the FBI or the CIA yet. You guys know I love the obscure, right? We will visit the Deep South and the state of Mississippi. Yep, that's right. If you thought only the federal government is capable of some shady shit, sometimes the governments of the 50 states also behave unscrupulously. We'll cover the state's old secret police called the Mississippi State Sovereignty Commission, a body within the Mississippi government formed in 1956, tasked with enforcing segregationist Jim Crow laws for roughly 20 years. Then we'll leave the US and head back to Europe to finally tackle a project that I suspect many of you have expected and that I anticipate will be the entry point for future listeners. Upon our arrival in Europe, we will head to Germany for what I think will be a 3-part series, first on the formation of Germany as a state and the development of the Prussian secret police, followed by a close examination of the Gestapo and the SS, and we'll top that all off with a deep dive on the East German Stasi. Thanks for listening to this episode of Secret Police. If you enjoyed it, the best thing you can do for me is to share it with the people you know. I mean, you don't even have to like them. Just tell them about it and send them a link. You can also give the show a review, 5 stars, if you think I'm worthy. The more we get the word out about this podcast, the more people discover this and join our dark tour of history here. Please do not claim an already inhabited piece of land as your own property and subjugate them by murder and brute force. Please don't create a scheme that makes you millions of dollars at the cost of millions of lives. Just kick back and enjoy 2025. Agents dismissed. Behold the power of the white man!